Oh, it's dark. Oh, that's a problem. Always dark, never turning the lights on. Of course, it's really dark the first few minutes you're dead. You ain't never seen darkness like that. But here I am, back from the dead. Come tell you a little story about finding light in the darkness. It's out there, you know. Sometimes you just got to look for it and you got to find it. And, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's get some lights on first of all, and then we can tell the story. Yeah, that's good. I like that. Well, it's good to be here. My name is Simeon. You may have heard of me, may not have heard of me. Let me tell you a little bit about Luke. Luke introduces me really well. It's in the scriptures, and I'm going to read it. Luke said, "Now there was a man in Jerusalem called Simeon who was righteous and devout. He was waiting for the consolation of Israel, and the Holy Spirit was upon him. It had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not die before he had seen the Lord's Christ. Moved by the Spirit, he went into the temple courts." That's right, me. See, well, that's nice. I like that. A devout and righteous man. Makes me sound pretty good. Makes me sound kind of important. I like that. Devout. Luke did a nice job on that. I saw Luke one time, not too long after we both died. We were walking down Hallelujah Boulevard, and I went over to him. I said, "Luke, I really like what you wrote about me in the scriptures." And he said, "Well, you're welcome. You're welcome. It's always important that we respect our elders." I looked at him and said, "Luke, I am not your father, but thank you anyway for respecting me like that." And so he did. And so that's me. Thing is, makes me sound a little more important than I am. That's kind of an after the fact type thing. In fact, I got to thinking about it one time. I'm not really sure that being called devout and righteous is that much of a compliment when you look back at our history. I mean, just look back at it and Moses. Moses was devout and righteous man. He was a murderer. David was a man after God's own heart, a devout and righteous man. Yeah, he was an adulterer and a murderer. Rahab, David's grandma, oh, yeah, she was a harlot. Let's keep going. Noah, he saved us all. Yeah, he was a drunkard. Ezekiel, the prophet, Ezekiel was as crazy as anybody could get. I'm not really sure I like being lumped in with all of these people as a devout. I'm just an ordinary guy. I'm just an ordinary guy with a story to tell. And I'm here today to tell you my story. My story, in a lot of ways, doesn't matter a whole lot except for the fact that it's part of his story. And since it's part of his story, it matters. I'm just a guy who happened to hear a voice and was waiting for the Messiah to come. I heard the voice the first time when I was really, really young. We were waiting for the Messiah. He'd been promised. In fact, you can go back and you can read the stories. For hundreds of years, we've been told that someone was coming who would restore Israel to their glory. Someone was coming who would be a warrior, king, a leader, and bring us back to where we were. And we heard the prophecies over and over about the Messiah, where he would come from, what he would do. And then for hundreds of years, there was silence. For longer than your country has been in existence, there was silence, and we heard nothing about these prophets telling us when Messiah would come, and we had no idea. And then one night I heard a voice. Now it's important to understand as I tell this story that I was a carpenter by trade. That was my job. I was a carpenter. I built things. And in fact, the first time I heard the voice, I was walking through a field of corn, and the voice said, "Simeon, if you build it, he will come." Oh, wait, no. That was some movie I was watching the other day. Never mind. The first time I actually heard the voice was the night my great-grandfather gathered us all around on the Sabbath and was telling us stories about the Great War, about the war of religious freedom, the war about restoring the kingdom when he was young, the war he had fought in, the war when he and his colleagues had gotten together and said, "We're tired of all these foreigners coming in and making our country what it is, and we want to make Israel great again." And they went out and fought a war. And the night he told those stories about the war and about the menorah and how the menorah came to be is the night I first heard the voices. The year was 167 when the war was fought. 167 BC is what you would call it. Now, in our day, we didn't know we were counting down towards the Messiah who would be coming in 6 BC. How he came before he came, we'll never know. But we were counting down towards his coming, looking forward to it, but we weren't counting down the years. We named the years by in the year that King Uzziah died, or in the year of the Great War for religious freedom. And so my great-grandfather gathered us and started to tell us the story about the war for the religious freedom. You see, what had happened, if you remember your history in those days, Alexander the Greek had conquered the whole world. He'd conquered the whole world as we knew it in those times. And then after he died, he had divided the world into kingdoms. You had people like the Ptolemies ruling part of it. And in our area, it was a group called the Seleucids. And the Seleucids were ruling over Israel, and they were Hellenistic. They were Greek, and they brought their worship, and they mixed it in with our worship, and it became very, very strange and very different and not pure. And there was a movement among the people that we need to kick them out, and we need to return to worship of the one true God in the right and only way. And so the war was fought. And there were great battles, but it was not battles as any army had ever seen before, because my great-grandfather and his people knew that they could not fight a direct war against the Seleucids, and it became a guerrilla war. And it became a war of attacks and counterattacks. And it's a war that was led by a man named Judah Maccabees. And we thought that maybe he was the Messiah, maybe he was the one who was going to come and restore us. And this war went on for 6 years. It went on for 6 years before we finally triumphed, and we established a new kingdom. And we kicked the Seleucids out. This man that some thought might be the Messiah, Judah Maccabees, was killed during that war. So he obviously was not the Messiah. But when the war was over, some of the chief priests went back into the temple, and they wanted to purify and cleanse the temple so worship could continue there as it had before they had come. And it's an 8-day process to purify and to cleanse things. And they went into the temple and went into this holy of holy areas that had been desecrated by all of these Greeks, and they get in there. And while they're there, they look, and there's the menorah. But it's not a menorah like we know it, with these 8, with the one in the middle. It was a menorah of 7. It had been commissioned by Moses when the Ark of the Covenant was built years before. It had rested in the inner sanctum of the tabernacle with the Ark as it traveled around with my forefathers. It had rested in the temple with the Ark of the Covenant because it was a symbol of the glory of God being revealed in this place. And only when the high priest went in was it actually used. And the priest went in to sanctify, and they went to light the menorah. And as they looked, there was only one vial of oil that had not been contaminated, that was still pure, enough to burn through one night. And they used it to light the menorah, and then by faith hoped and prayed that there would be some miracle. And miracle of miracles, that one little vial of oil lasted 8 days, which is why we now have 8 lights on the menorah plus the one in the center instead of 7. And so they purified and they cleansed the temple, and this miracle happened. And it was that night when I went to bed after my great-grandfather had told all these stories that I heard the voice for the first time. I was in bed and I heard him say, "Simeon, Simeon." So I sat up and said, "Yeah, what?" "Simeon, you looking forward to the Messiah?" "Yeah, that'd be great. That's going to be really cool. I can't wait till the Messiah comes. Want to see him. My great-grandfather just told me these stories." "Simeon, I promise you, I tell you, you will not die until you see the Messiah." And I said, "Hey, that's pretty cool. Do you have any idea how long that's going to be? Because I'd like to get a time frame on this." And the voice just laughed and said, "Simeon, I promise you that you, in God's time, in my time, will see the consolation of Israel. He will wipe every tear from your eye and take every tear from the nation of Israel, and you will see my glory revealed in the Messiah." I got up the next morning and told my family about it. Said, "Hey, I heard a voice last night." And they said, "Oh, yeah, you're crazy." And they all thought I was crazy and started calling me funny names. I didn't tell anybody about it for years and years after that and just kept my mouth shut. But I kind of believed that maybe, just maybe, I was going to see the Messiah. So I waited for the Messiah to come. I remember the day I fell in love with her. It was the day I met her. Now, you people, in your day and time, you do marriage in a very, very strange way. For you guys, it's all about love and emotion and feeling good and being happy and likes on Instagram and all these other wonderful things. And can we get really cute pictures as a couple? And then people get married and the business of marriage comes along and the marriages don't work. In our day, we did it right. It's always better in the old days the way we did it when I was growing up. Always. We did it right. We did the business first. We took care of that. And now, if you wanted to do business, if you wanted to have a bride in those days, you had to pay a betrothal fee to the family. Now, a good bride would get you 2-3 donkeys. I was a carpenter. I didn't have any donkeys. I wanted to get married. Couldn't afford to. Couldn't get betrothed. Didn't know what I was going to do. And then one day I met this fella named Eli. I was getting old at this time, and Eli and I were talking, and Eli was worried because he had a daughter who was getting up there in years. She was almost 20 years old and still wasn't married, and he was getting kind of worried about it. So Eli and I, we made a bargain. And I said, Eli, here's what we'll do. I said, you've got some family you were just telling me about. They're building a place over there in that village just outside of Jerusalem, about 5 miles away. I said, I'll make a trade with you. How about I go over there and I help them build that place? And he said, here's what you do, Simeon. He said, you go over there, you spend a month helping them build their new place, their new house over there, and then once a year for a week, as long as you're married to my Rachel, you go back and you help them build on and add on whatever they do. And I thought, man, that's a lot cheaper than getting 2 donkeys. That sounds good. That's what I'll do. And so I got engaged to Rachel. I met her on the day of the wedding. It was really cool. Business was taken care of. And then something strange happened. We grew to love each other. We developed an affection for each other. We started to build a life together. I knew from the moment I met her, because her first words to me were, Simeon, you must be a man of honor for all that you've done for my family. And I thought, man, this is one wise woman. And I knew that we were going to have a good relationship. And we did. And we grew together, and the years were wonderful, and the years were blessed. In fact, I got to a point where I felt like I could trust her with anything, and I told her one day, I said, Rachel, I've got to tell you about this voice I heard. And I told her, I said, the voice says to me, I will not die until I see the Messiah. She said, you got any idea what that timeline might be? I said, I have none. She said, Simeon, God's promises are not in vain. You will see the Messiah in God's time, I do believe. The years went on, and she blessed me with children, 2. The first one was born a girl. We named her Joelle, which means my Jehovah is the Lord. What an incredible child. A child who loved the stories of Israel and who would listen to me tell them over and over again. And then a couple years later, a son, David bar Simeon, David, son of Simeon. And like his namesake, the ancient king, he was a man of music and of poetry. And they were incredible. And as they grew and as they got older, I started to tell them the stories. And one day I told them the same thing I had told their mom about the voices, the things that I had heard. And my children didn't think I was crazy. They believed the stories. And each week during the Sabbath, we would gather together as family for our Sabbath meal. And as we gathered around, we would talk about the day Messiah would come. And we looked forward to the coming of Messiah. And my children would sing, and we would play the music. And we would wait as we said, oh come, Emmanuel. Even all these years later, I can still hear the music of my children. And together we waited for Messiah to come. But it wasn't Messiah that came. It was Pompeii and war. The year was 63 in your calendar. And we lived there just outside of Jerusalem, often in the city, just like it was our home. And word came that Pompey was coming, this general, this Roman, who had been conquering different areas in our parts of the world, and Pompey had his sights set on Jerusalem. And he was coming, and the 100 years of freedom that we had known was in jeopardy. And he came from the north, and as he did, the call went out to everyone who could come to defend the city and defend the temple to come, because the Romans are coming. The Romans are coming, and we went in, and those of us who were craftsmen and carpenters and builders, we went out and we dug ditches around the wall of the city to try to impede the progress of the Romans, and we put these ditches in place, and the Romans came and they laid siege to the city. And it lasted 3 months. And they started to fill in these ditches inch by inch, and our artillery would go up. Our archers would be up on the walls of the city firing at them to impede their progress. But then they brought in longer artillery that would cause our archers to have to hunker down, and while they did, they'd fill in the ditches and advance on the city. And we knew that there were people within the city who were sympathetic to the Romans, who were looking for ways to profit from their presence there. I remember the day the city fell. Myself and some other men had been sent out of the city on a clandestine mission to go behind enemy lines and sabotage. And while we were out, while we were gone, somebody from the family of Hyrcanus inside the city went and opened one of the gates and let Romans in. And they flooded the city. They went everywhere, and they started to kill mercilessly everyone they could find, men, women, children, and they killed 12,000 people that day. I heard that my wife Rachel and my son David died with swords in their hands defending the city. And I have no idea what happened to my daughter. And the city fell. And Pompey marched into Jerusalem. Bodies everywhere. And he marched into the temple, the Holy of Holies. And he desecrated that sanctum by his presence there. And we don't know what happened. Something happened in there, because when Pompey came out, he didn't take anything out with him. He left it all. He sealed it up, and he went to our leaders that were still alive, and he said, I want you to sanctify this temple, and I want you to continue to worship God here. Just pay your taxes to Rome. And he withdrew from the city, and he left. But it was no consolation for me. No Messiah had come. No Messiah had come to save our city, to restore it. No Messiah had come to save my family. And all I wanted to do was die, because the Anointed One had not come. Where is God in all of this? Where is God when pain overtakes? Where is God when we lose family? Where is God when his place of worship is being attacked and torn down by the world around it? Where is God? What kind of God allows this to happen? What kind of God just stands idly by with a promised Messiah and doesn't deliver? What kind of God is this? I had no answers. I just wanted to die. And I had nowhere to go. And nothing to do. And yet somehow I still believed that there was a Messiah coming and that it was not yet my time. And I had to decide what to do with life, and I couldn't stay in Jerusalem. And I couldn't go back to the city of bread where we had lived. So I went to the city of Bethany, just a few miles, 8 miles or so outside, and I spent some time there, but it just wasn't right. There were members of Rachel's family there, and I just couldn't stand the thought. And then I heard that up in the Galilee, up in the north, that there was a resurgence going on, that the cities were being built and rebuilt, and that there was a need for skilled craftsmen and carpenters. And I decided I'm going to go to the Galilee, to this place I've never been before. And so I walked. I was very old. It was arduous. It was 80 miles. It was 4 days of walking for a young, healthy man. And I walked. And I got there, and I knew no one, and I had no place to go, but I was able to get some work early. And as I got some work, I started to meet people. And I finally met a family that said, hey, we've got a place. You could stay with us. Come, Simeon, stay in our house. And I did, and they had a young boy, and he and his friend used to play together all the time, Joe and Zeke. They just loved being together. And as I lived in that house, the parents said, for living here, will you help teach them how to be carpenters? And so I did. And from a young age, I taught these boys the tools and the trade and how to do it, and they became so much better than I ever was. In fact, by the time they hit their teens, they were getting jobs everywhere that you could imagine. And every time they got invited to a job, they'd invite me to come along, and even though I was old and slowed them down, they wanted me there. And it was good to be with them and to spend the time and to watch them grow. They were fun boys. And I can remember the only thing they ever wanted to do was get married. That's what they told me. We want to get married someday. We want to get married someday. They ended up marrying cousins, I do believe. And I got to talking to them one day, and Zeke not only wanted to get married, he wanted to be a priest. He had a little bit of Levite blood in him too. And so he wanted to be a priest. Joe just wanted to be a carpenter. But I told him the story about Rachel and how I had married her and the incredible life we had. And they both said, someday we want that too. We want to be just like you, Simeon, just a lot younger than you were. Thank you, guys. Then a new ruler came to power in the Galilee. His name was Herod. Your history records him as Herod the Great. We recorded him as Herod the Merciless. And as Herod came to power in the Galilee, I saw some of the things happening, and I saw him starting to align himself with Rome. And I thought, this is not going to be good. I cannot stay here. And so I gathered the guys together, and I said, I'm leaving. My prayer for you is that you will find the wives God has chosen for you, that your lives will be blessed, and that maybe someday we will get the chance to see each other again, but I cannot stay here. And I made my journey back to the house of bread, to the city of bread. And I waited, and I waited, and I waited. When I got to the city, I didn't know where to go at first. I didn't know where to stay. But I remembered that Rachel had a nephew that had a guest house, and I thought maybe I could at least get a room there for a couple nights. And so I went there, and he said, I'd love to have you. He said, I'd love to have you, but I don't have any room. I said, okay. But then he came back and said, no, wait a minute, I got a small place you can stay. Why don't you stay over there? And then he told me about his cousin, another nephew of Rachel's. And he said, he's got a bakery that he's just opening. You could use a job, couldn't you, Simeon? I'm like, yeah, I could use a job. That'd be great. I'll go to the bakery and I'll sell. And I went there. And I started to work in the bakery. And it was actually a pretty good job because I was old by then and my knees were kind of hobbling and I could just sit down in the bakery, and it would have been nice to be able to read a Kindle or watch some TV, but our Wi-Fi was pretty spotty and we didn't have any TV. So it was kind of hard to do. And I would work in the bakery. Unbeknownst to us, things were happening in other parts of the world that were about to change our life. After Pompey left, there was this uneasy truce that lasted for a long time. But then Pompey went back to Rome and he died. And after he died, an emperor came to power. His name was Julius Caesar. And he was in power until the day two guys, Brutus and Cassius, decided to kill him. And so they killed Caesar. And then these other two guys, Antony and Octavian, said, no, can't have that. And so they killed Brutus and Cassius. And then Antony and Octavian got into a fight with each other. about who was going to be emperor. And that's when Herod got involved up there in the Galilee, and he said, you know what, I'm going to get involved with this also, and I'm going to side with Anthony, and I'm going to send him people, and I'm going to send him. And then he thought about it, he said, oh, wait a minute, looks like Octavian's winning. I think I'm going to switch sides and go with Octavian, kind of like White Sox fans did this year here in your country. And so he sided with Octavian. Well, Octavian kills Anthony, and Octavian becomes the emperor and changes his name to Caesar Augustus. And he reigns in Rome for over 30 years. And he looks at Herod and he goes, Herod, you were a great help to me. I declare that you shall be the king of all of Israel, not just the Galilee. And this is what Herod's been waiting for. And so Herod's like, let's go. We're going to Jerusalem. And here we were 30 years later, and here comes Herod riding down to Jerusalem again, and the city's going to be under siege. And he gets there, and he goes in, and they start to kill, and they start to rampage through the city. And then Herod puts a stop to it because he wants to have some kind of relationship there. He wants to be a king who's going to be beloved. And he comes into the city. And then he sends out a call for craftsmen and workmen to come and help build his royal palace, the greatest that's ever been seen. Fortunately, I was too old at that time to do anything about that. But I was waiting still for the Messiah. And I thought, God, this is a perfect time to come. And sometimes God's timing just stinks. I was like, God, how about my timing? My timing's pretty good. Why don't you come on right now? I can see how this all works out. And he didn't answer me. And I continued to wait. In fact, I waited 31 more years. I don't remember a lot about those years, but it was 31 years before I heard the voice again, finally. I don't remember much. They passed, work in the bakery every day, take care of people. Then there was this night. I remember this night that I thought I heard maybe the voice coming or there was some loud singing or there was something going on, and so I got up out of my bed, but by the time I got to my window, it had stopped. A couple days later, I'm hobbling down to work, and I'm at the bakery, and this fella comes in. 50 maybe. That's young, 50 is. And he walks in, and I look at him, I'm thinking, man, he looks familiar. But I couldn't place him. He speaks to me and says, hey, I'd like some bread. And in that moment, I went, I know that voice. Joe, what are you doing here? It's me. It's Simeon. And he looks at me, Simeon. Oh, my goodness, Simeon, it's so incredible to meet you. Joe, what are you doing here? He says, well, they got this new tax. Always new taxes, new government, new taxes all the time. And so we had to come down here to pay the tax. I said, oh, well, what's going on? He says, well, a lot's happened. He says, I found a woman. I got a girl. I'm getting married, Simeon, just like you. I had to wait till I was really, really old. Thanks, Joe. That's really nice of you. He says, and Simeon, you kind of look really old now. I'm like, thank you. You're doing good. He said, and I asked him, I said, Simeon, so how's the marriage? How's this working out? He said, well, it's kind of been strange so far. It wasn't quite what I expected it would be. He said, and we came down here, and we had a baby a couple days ago. And I thought, oh, man, that's great. And I was getting ready to ask him about that. And in that moment, a whole bunch of ruffians came through the door. Came in, foul-smelling, nasty-looking guys came in, and they're like, hey, we're hungry. We're a bunch of shepherds. We've been out in the field, and we haven't had any food to eat for the last couple days, and we need something to eat. So I started feeding them, and while I'm doing that, Joe left. So I didn't get a chance to talk to him anymore. Well, it was about 4 or 5 days later. I was laying in bed, and I heard the voice. And the voice said to me, Simeon. So I sat up like I'd done before. Simeon, I need you to go to Jerusalem tomorrow. The time has come to see the Messiah. And I said, no. I am old. I am tired. My knees hurt. My back hurt. I am not walking that far. I moved right here to Bethlehem because the prophet Micah said that the Messiah would be here in Bethlehem, so you can just have him come on by my house tomorrow. The voice laughed, said, Simeon, Simeon, the time has come. You must go the distance to Jerusalem. I will ease your pain as you go. But the Messiah will be there and you will see my glory. And so, for one last night, I waited for the Messiah to come. I got up early the next morning because 5-mile walk takes a while. And I knew I would be slow and I knew it would take time to get there. But as I started to walk, I started to feel better along the way. I stopped once. There were people still passing me. A lot of people going to Jerusalem that day. It was going to be a busy day. I stopped once and sat under a tree, old olive tree, and watched people go by the road. And I thought I saw Joe and Mary go by. Didn't know her name at the time. He was going to introduce me later. But I thought I saw him go by. And I tried to catch him. But I couldn't catch him. That donkey she was riding was a lot faster than I was. And they went on into the city. I went in the city and walked down the streets that I had not been in for 60 years. And I walked through them, and they were the same and different all at the same time. And I walked past places where we had lived. I walked past places where my wife most likely died. And there were tears, and there was laughter. And then I came to the temple and the temple courts, and they had not changed much at all. There were businessmen, businesswomen out there selling their wares. They were out there selling doves and lambs and all kinds of things. And there were money changers out there cheating people. And I wanted to go over and just throw a couple tables over and holler at them a little. But I was much too old to be doing that in 2 weeks, so I didn't. And as I'm standing there, I heard some woman over there going, Messiah's coming, the Messiah's coming. I looked over and I said, oh, that has to be Crazy Anna. I'd heard the rumors about Crazy Anna. I'd never met her, never come to the city in all those years. But she was over there because everybody thinks a prophet is crazy, especially the people in their hometown. And she's over there talking about how Messiah is coming and Messiah is coming. And she was a woman who had been married for about 7 years, and her husband died. And she spent the rest of her life in the temple proclaiming the imminent coming of the Messiah day after day. She ate there, slept there, everything. You would think at some point she would take some time off, go home, sit down on the couch, and just put a nice yard sign in her yard and tell people Messiah's coming that way. But she stayed there for over 60 years telling people Messiah's coming. I saw Joe and his wife and their child, and they went over and they bought a couple turtle doves. And I went, oh yeah, he's got to be about 8 days old. It's time to present him in the temple. It's time for the purification rites for Mary and for him to be completed. And in the law, it requires a sacrifice of a lamb, unless you're really poor. And then you can go buy 2 doves to sacrifice. Well, he's a carpenter. He's poor. And he went and bought the doves. And then a little while later, he came back out. And he saw me in the courtyards. And he came over. And he said, hey, Simeon, Simeon. And he came over and he brought his wife over. He says, I want to introduce you. This is my wife, Mary. And I didn't see her at all because they were holding a child. And the voice spoke to me and it said, Simeon, this is the Messiah. This is the one you have been waiting for your whole life. This is the one who will take away your tears and the tears of Israel and the tears of all. And I looked at that child. And I think the voice may have spoken to Mary and to Joe also. And I reached for that child, and she was a little reticent at first. But Joe put his hand on her shoulder, and she handed me the child. And then I said these words. Luke recorded them for me. He put them in the scripture. And they simply say, Sovereign Lord, as you have promised, you may now dismiss your servant in peace. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the sight of all nations, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and the glory of your people, Israel. And as I stood there, I looked into Mary's eyes. And all the pain and all the hurt and all the story of my life came flooding back to me. And I couldn't help myself. I looked at her, I said, Mary, Mary, this child is going to cause the rise and the fall of many here in Israel. And people are going to speak against this child. And people's hearts are going to be revealed by what they say about this child. And Mary, a sword is going to pierce your very soul. I died after that. Doesn't matter how long, exactly when. Sometime after that, I died, just as I had been promised. But the truth is, I had held the glory of God in my hand, and it had not been a warrior king. It had been a child and an infant. And in one moment, I got to see the glory of God, the humanity of God, and the divinity of God all in one baby. And so that's my story. I died because of the child, and because the child lives. Because the child lives, I live.